The dust settled like a fine veil over Oklahoma City's Main Street as Katherine Davis stared out the window of her modest boarding house room, the weight of solitude pressing down on her shoulders more heavily than the sweltering July heat of 1885. Today marked her 23rd birthday, and for the first time in her life, there wasn't a single soul who would remember it. Catherine Kate, to the few who'd earned the right, twisted the simple gold band she still wore on her finger, a painful reminder of the husband she'd buried just 3 months prior. Thomas had succumbed to pneumonia in the early spring, leaving her alone in this frontier town where she knew almost no one. His death had come suddenly, cruelly, transforming her from a cherished wife to a widow in what felt like the blink of an eye. She'd moved to Oklahoma City with Thomas barely a year ago, drawn by promises of opportunity in the growing railroad town. They'd been happy, making plans for children and a future that now existed only in her memory. Thomas had always made her birthdays special. Last year, he'd surprised her with a small cake shared under the stars, promising many more celebrations to come. Kate brushed away an errant tear and straightened her simple blue calico dress. There was no use in wallowing. The boarding house where she now lived and worked as a housekeeper belonged to Mrs. Eleanor Hayes, a stern but fair widow who had taken pity on Kate after Thomas passed. The arrangement provided her with shelter and meager wages, enough to survive but little else. "Miss Davis, are you finished with the upstairs rooms?" Mrs. Hayes called from below, her voice echoing up the narrow staircase. "Yes, Mrs. Hayes. Just finishing now," Kate replied, tucking a strand of chestnut hair back into her simple bun. She cast one final glance at her reflection in the small mirror above her washstand. The woman staring back at her looked tired, the spark that once lit her hazel eyes dimmed by grief and exhaustion. The boarding house, a 2-story structure with 8 rooms for let, stood on the eastern edge of Oklahoma City. It wasn't the finest establishment in town, but it was clean and respectable, 2 qualities Mrs. Hayes prized above all else. Kate had been fortunate to find a position there, especially as a widow with no family connections in the territory. The day stretched ahead of her like an endless prairie, rooms to clean, linens to wash, and meals to help prepare for the boarders. Work was a blessing, Kate had decided. It kept her hands busy and her mind from dwelling too deeply on all she had lost. By midday, the heat had become nearly unbearable. Kate paused in her work to wipe the perspiration from her brow with her apron. She was hanging freshly laundered sheets on the line behind the boarding house when she first noticed him. Wyatt Keller stood at the fence, separating the boarding house yard from the neighboring livery stable. He was tall and broad-shouldered, with sun-bronzed skin and eyes the color of a summer sky. His cowboy hat was pulled low, casting shadows across his features, but Kate could see he was watching her with undisguised interest. "Afternoon, madam," he said, his voice deep and resonant. "Mighty hot day for such work." Kate nodded stiffly, unused to casual conversation after months of quiet grief. "The sheets dry faster in this heat," she replied, keeping her eyes on her task. "I reckon that's true," he agreed, a hint of amusement in his tone. "Name's Wyatt Keller. I'm working over at Mason's livery. Just started last week." Kate pinned another sheet to the line before responding. "Katherine Davis. I work here at the boarding house." "Pleased to meet you, Mrs. Davis," he said, respectfully noting her wedding band. "Miss Davis," she corrected automatically, then bit her lip. "That is, I'm a widow." A shadow crossed his face. "My condolences, Miss Davis. This territory can be hard on folks." There was something genuine in his expression that made Kate pause. Unlike the pitying looks she usually received, his eyes held understanding, Perhaps he too knew something of loss. "Thank you, Mr. Keller," she said, softening slightly. "If you'll excuse me, I have more work waiting." He tipped his hat politely. "Of course. Good day to you." As Kate returned to the house, she found herself glancing back over her shoulder. Wyatt Keller was still standing there, watching her go with an expression she couldn't quite decipher. Over the next 2 weeks, Kate encountered Wyatt Keller with increasing frequency. He seemed to have a knack for appearing whenever she stepped outside, bringing water from the well, hanging laundry, or simply taking a moment's respite from the stifling heat of the boarding house kitchen. Their conversations remained brief, but gradually became less formal. She learned he was originally from Texas, had worked cattle drives for years before deciding to settle somewhere more permanent. He never mentioned family, and Kate never asked, respecting the unspoken boundaries between them. On the morning of her birthday, Kate awoke before dawn, a habit from her farming childhood that had never left her. She dressed quietly in the pre-dawn darkness, trying to ignore the hollow ache in her chest. 23 years old today, and utterly alone. "Happy birthday, Kate," she whispered to herself, the words hanging in the empty room. Mrs. Hayes had given her additional duties for the day, preparing for new boarders, expected on the afternoon train. Kate threw herself into the work, scrubbing floors until her knees ached and polishing furniture until every surface gleamed. Physical exhaustion, she hoped, would keep the memories at bay. By late afternoon, Kate's arms trembled with fatigue as she carried a stack of fresh linens up the narrow stairs. The new guests weren't due for another hour, but Mrs. Hayes insisted everything be ready well in advance. "Miss Davis," Mrs. Hayes called from below. "When you've finished with those rooms, please fetch some eggs from Mr. Peterson's store. We'll need extra for breakfast tomorrow." "Yes, Mrs. Hayes," Kate replied automatically. The walk to Peterson's general store would be a welcome break from the confines of the boarding house. Kate quickly finished making up the beds and then slipped out, grateful for the excuse to escape, if only briefly. Oklahoma City was growing rapidly, the streets bustling with freight wagons, riders and pedestrians going about their business. The railroad had transformed the once quiet settlement into a hub of commerce and opportunity. Kate kept her eyes lowered as she navigated the wooden sidewalks, avoiding the muddy street where recent rain had turned the dirt to treacherous sludge. At Peterson's store, she selected a dozen eggs and placed them carefully in her basket. Mr. Peterson, a balding man with kind eyes, smiled as he wrapped the eggs in paper. "How are you settling in at Hayes Place?" he asked, clearly remembering her circumstances. "Well enough," Kate answered politely. "It's good to have work." "And a roof," he added knowingly. "Not everyone's so fortunate these days. Heard there was trouble at the Silver Spur Saloon last night. 2 cowboys shot over a card game." Kate nodded absently, used to the violence that occasionally erupted in frontier towns. Were they killed? One was. Others with Doc Wallace not expected to last the night. Peterson shook his head sadly. Territory's still wild in places. After paying for her purchase, Kate stepped back onto the street, her mind drifting to Thomas. He'd always insisted on accompanying her on errands, concerned for her safety in the rough-edged town. Now she walked alone, one of countless women forced into independence by death or abandonment. As she passed the livery, the sound of hammering drew her attention. Wyatt was repairing a stall door, his sleeves rolled up to reveal muscular forearms as he worked. He looked up as if sensing her presence, a smile breaking across his tanned face. "Miss Davis," he called, setting down his hammer. "Out for a stroll." "Errands," she corrected, lifting her basket slightly. Wyatt wiped his hands on a rag and approached the fence. "You're looking a bit worn today. Everything all right?" The simple question asked with genuine concern nearly undid her. Kate swallowed hard against the sudden lump in her throat. "I'm fine," she said stiffly. "Just busy with work." He studied her for a moment, his blue eyes seeing more than she would have liked. "You know," he said casually, "sometimes it helps to talk about what's troubling you." "Nothing's troubling me, Mr. Keller," Kate insisted. "If you'll excuse me, Mrs. Hayes is expecting these eggs." She turned to leave, but his voice stopped her. "It's your birthday, isn't it?" Kate froze, her heart suddenly pounding. "How did you know that?" Wyatt looked slightly embarrassed. "I overheard Mrs. Hayes mentioning it to Mr. Hayes this morning. Said something about you being quiet all day, that it must be hard having a birthday so soon after losing your husband." Kate stared at him, unable to formulate a response. The fact that Mrs. Hayes had noticed, had remembered, was surprising enough. That this cowboy now knew such a personal detail left her feeling strangely exposed. "Yes," she finally said. "It's my birthday. 23 years old today." "That's a fine age," Wyatt said softly. "Too young to be carrying so much sadness." The unexpected gentleness in his voice threatened to crack the careful composure Kate had maintained all day. "I should go," she said quickly, turning away before he could see the tears gathering in her eyes. "Miss Davis," he called after her. "Katherine." She paused but didn't turn back. "I get off work at 7. Would you meet me behind the boarding house then? Just for a moment?" Kate hesitated, propriety warring with the terrible loneliness that had been her constant companion for months. "I don't think that would be appropriate, Mr. Keller." "Nothing improper, I promise," Wyatt assured her. Well, no one should be alone on their birthday." The simple statement, offered without pity or expectation, touched something deep within her. Kate found herself nodding before she could reconsider. 7 o'clock, she agreed softly, then hurried away before she could change her mind. Back at the boarding house, Kate delivered the eggs to Mrs. Hayes and returned to her duties, her mind oddly distracted. What had possessed her to agree to meet Wyatt Keller? She barely knew the man, and her period of mourning for Thomas was far from over. Yet the prospect of spending a few minutes in friendly company on her birthday didn't seem like such a terrible breach of propriety. The new boarders arrived on schedule, a traveling salesman and his wife, a young schoolteacher coming to take up a position at the territorial school, and an elderly gentleman visiting his son's family. Kate helped settle them into their rooms, provided fresh water for washing, and answered questions about meal times and local establishments. By the time she finished, the grandfather clock in the foyer showed 7:15. Kate slipped into her room, quickly splashing water on her face and smoothing her hair. She pinched her pale cheeks to bring some color to them, then immediately felt foolish for doing so. "This isn't a social call," she reminded her reflection sternly. "Just a kind gesture from a neighbor." Nevertheless, she exchanged her work apron for a clean one and straightened her collar before making her way downstairs. Mrs. Hayes was busy in the kitchen preparing the evening meal, which gave Kate the opportunity to slip out the back door unnoticed. The evening air was cooler, a blessed relief after the day's heat. The sun hung low on the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Kate stood uncertainly in the yard, wondering if Wyatt would actually appear, or if he'd thought better of his impulsive invitation. She didn't have to wonder long. The gate to the backyard creaked open and Wyatt stepped through, no longer dressed in his work clothes. He'd cleaned up, wearing a fresh shirt with his dark trousers, his hair still damp from washing. "You came," he said, sounding genuinely pleased. "I said I would," Kate replied, suddenly feeling awkward. "Though I'm not sure why I'm here." Wyatt smiled, revealing a dimple in his right cheek that Kate hadn't noticed before. "Wait right here," he said, disappearing back through the gate. Kate considered fleeing back into the house, but curiosity kept her rooted in place. Moments later, Wyatt returned carrying something carefully in his hands. It was a small cake, no larger than a dinner plate, frosted simply with white icing. A single candle stood in its center, unlit. "Happy birthday, Catherine," Wyatt said softly, holding out his offering. Kate stared at the cake, then at Wyatt, completely speechless. 1,000 emotions collided within her: surprise, gratitude, grief, and something warm she couldn't name. "How did you?" she began, unable to finish the question. "Mrs. Miller at the bakery helped me," Wyatt explained. "It's nothing fancy, but I remembered what you said about your husband always making your birthday special. I thought maybe you shouldn't have to go without a cake on your birthday, even if he's gone." Tears welled in Kate's eyes, spilling over before she could stop them. The simple kindness of this near stranger had somehow penetrated the armor she'd built around herself since Thomas's death. "I don't know what to say," she whispered. Wyatt produced a match from his pocket. "You don't have to say anything, just make a wish." He struck the match and lit the candle, the small flame dancing in the gathering twilight. Kate looked at the glowing candle, then up at Wyatt's face, illuminated by its gentle light. His expression held no expectations, no demands, just warmth and a kind of understanding that reached across the space between them. Taking a deep breath, Kate closed her eyes and blew out the candle. "What did you wish for?" Wyatt asked. Kate shook her head with a small smile. "I can't tell you or it won't come true. That's the rule." "Fair enough," he chuckled. "Now, I hope you'll share this with me. I'm not much for eating whole cakes alone." They sat on the wooden bench beside Mrs. Hayes' kitchen garden, the cake between them. Wyatt produced a small knife and 2 forks from his pocket, prepared for their impromptu celebration. "I haven't had cake since." Kate trailed off, accepting the slice Wyatt offered. "Since your husband," he finished gently. "It's all right to say it. Pretending the pain isn't there doesn't make it go away." Kate looked at him curiously. "You sound like you know something about loss, Mr. Keller." "Wyatt, please," he corrected. "And yes, I do. Lost my whole family to typhoid when I was 18. Parents and 2 younger sisters, all in the space of 2 weeks. "I'm so sorry," Kate said, genuinely moved by his revelation. "That must have been terrible." Wyatt nodded, his eyes distant with memory. "It was. Felt like the ground disappeared from under my feet. Spent 5 years riding from ranch to ranch after that, never staying anywhere too long. Easier to keep moving than to build something new that could be taken away." His honesty touched something in Kate, drawing out her own truth in return. "I feel adrift," she admitted. "Thomas and I had such plans. A home of our own, children. A future. Now I'm just existing, going through the motions of living without any real purpose." "Purpose has a way of finding you again," Wyatt said thoughtfully. "At least, that's what I'm counting on myself." They ate their cake in companionable silence as the first stars appeared in the deepening blue of the sky. The sweetness of the gesture wasn't lost on Kate. This man she barely knew had somehow understood exactly what she needed on this difficult day. "I have something else for you," Wyatt said when they finished, reaching into his pocket. "Mr. Keller, Wyatt, you've done too much already," Kate protested. "It's not much," he assured her, pulling out a small envelope and handing it to her. "Just open it." Kate carefully opened the envelope and withdrew a small card. On it, written in surprisingly elegant handwriting, were the words, "I promise you won't have to face your next birthday alone. Wyatt Keller." She read the words twice, trying to comprehend their meaning. "I don't understand." Wyatt looked slightly embarrassed but met her eyes steadily. "It's just that. Well, I know what it's like to feel alone in the world, to wake up and wonder if anyone would notice or care if you simply disappeared. I wanted you to know that, at least for your next birthday, someone will remember. Someone will care. The simple promise, offered without romantic overtones or inappropriate expectations, moved Kate deeply. It was a gesture of human connection, an acknowledgement of shared pain and the healing power of simple kindness. "Thank you," she whispered, carefully tucking the card back into its envelope. "That means more than I can express." Wyatt smiled, relief evident in his expression. "I was afraid you might think me too forward." "It's a promise of friendship," Kate clarified, needing to establish boundaries for both their sakes. "And I'm grateful for it." "Friendship it is," Wyatt agreed readily. "Though I hope you'll allow me to call on you properly sometime, perhaps Sunday after church." Kate hesitated, aware of the implications of being seen publicly with a man so soon after her husband's death. "People will talk. Let them," Wyatt said simply. "Friends can walk together after church without causing a scandal. Besides, this town has bigger concerns than a widow and a cowboy enjoying a Sunday stroll." His pragmatic approach made Kate smile despite herself. "Very well. Sunday after church." The sound of the back door opening startled them both. Mrs. Hayes stood framed in the doorway, her expression curious. "Miss Davis, is everything all right? Supper's nearly ready." Kate rose quickly. "Yes, Mrs. Hayes. Mr. Keller was just wishing me a happy birthday." The older woman's eyes moved from Kate to Wyatt, then to the remnants of the cake between them. Something in her stern countenance softened. "How thoughtful. Will you be joining us for supper, Mr. Keller?" Wyatt stood, hat in hand. "Thank you for the kind offer, madam, but I have some matters to attend to this evening. Perhaps another time." Mrs. Hayes nodded, seemingly satisfied with his respectful response. "As you wish. Miss Davis, please help me serve the meal once you've concluded your celebration." "Of course, Mrs. Hayes, I'll be right in," Kate assured her. Once the landlady had retreated inside, Kate turned back to Wyatt. "Thank you again. For the cake and for understanding." Wyatt gathered the plates and remaining cake. "You're welcome, Katherine. I'll see you Sunday." "Sunday," she confirmed, feeling lighter than she had in months. As she watched him walk away, Kate pressed her hand against the pocket where she'd tucked his promise. For the first time since Thomas's death, she found herself looking forward to something beyond just surviving each day. The following Sunday, Kate sat stiffly in the small Methodist church, acutely aware of the curious glances sent her way when Wyatt slipped into the pew beside her just as the service was beginning. His presence beside her, respectful but unmistakable, set the town gossips buzzing immediately. "You're causing a stir," she whispered as they rose for the opening hymn. Wyatt's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Good. Gives them something to talk about besides the price of cattle." Despite her initial discomfort, Kate found herself enjoying the simple pleasure of having someone beside her in church again. Wyatt sang the hymns in a pleasant baritone, followed the sermon attentively, and generally conducted himself with perfect propriety. By the time the service ended, Kate's tension had eased considerably. Outside, the July sun beat down mercilessly on the congregation as they spilled out onto the church steps. Several people nodded politely to Kate, their eyes flickering curiously between her and Wyatt. "Mrs. Peterson, how lovely to see you," Kate said to the storekeeper's wife, determined to act normally. The older woman smiled warmly. "Miss Davis, you're looking well today, and Mr. Keller, isn't it? I believe my husband mentioned you're working at Mason's livery now." "Yes, madam," Wyatt replied politely. "Going on 3 weeks now." "Well, it's good to see new faces in church," Mrs. Peterson said meaningfully. "Will you be attending the town social next Saturday? The proceeds are going toward a new school building." Before Kate could decline, Wyatt spoke up. "That sounds like a worthy cause. "What do you think, Miss Davis? Would you consider attending with me?" Put on the spot, Kate could hardly refuse without seeming churlish. "I suppose that would be nice," she conceded, aware that every word of their exchange would be repeated throughout Oklahoma City before supper time. Mrs. Peterson beamed approvingly. "Wonderful. We'll look forward to seeing you both there." As they walked away from the church, Kate gave Wyatt a reproachful look. "You shouldn't have done that. Now everyone will assume we're courting." Wyatt looked unrepentant. "Would that be so terrible? I'm not suggesting we announce an engagement, Katherine. Just a dance or two at a respectable social gathering." "I'm still in mourning," Kate reminded him, though even to her own ears the protest sounded weak. "Grief doesn't operate on a tidy schedule," Wyatt said gently, "and I'm not asking you to forget your husband. But perhaps allowing yourself a few hours of normal social interaction isn't the betrayal you think it is." They walked in silence for a moment, passing the schoolhouse and turning onto the main street. The Sunday quiet of Oklahoma City was a stark contrast to its weekday bustle, with most businesses closed and only the occasional rider disturbing the peace. "Tell me about him," Wyatt said suddenly. "Your husband." Kate glanced at him in surprise. "You want to hear about Thomas?" "Of course," Wyatt replied simply. "He was important to you, still is." No one had asked Kate about Thomas since the funeral. People mentioned him in hushed, uncomfortable tones, offering condolences but never inviting her to actually speak about the man she'd lost. Wyatt's straightforward request unleashed a flood of memories. "He was a teacher," Kate began hesitantly. "We met in St. Louis when I was 19. He came to board with my aunt, who took in lodgers to supplement her widow's pension. Thomas was studying to become a lawyer then, but he loved books and knowledge more than the practice of law." As they walked slowly through town, Kate found herself sharing stories about Thomas, his gentle humor, his passion for literature, his dreams of someday opening a school of his own in the West, where education was still a precious commodity. "He convinced me to marry him and come to Oklahoma Territory last year," Kate continued. "Said the opportunities for educated people were limitless here. We were going to save enough for him to open a school by next spring." "He sounds like a good man," Wyatt said sincerely. "He was," Kate agreed, surprised to find she could speak of Thomas now with fondness rather than just raw pain. "What about you? You've never mentioned a wife or sweetheart." Wyatt shook his head. "Never found the right woman, or perhaps never stayed in one place long enough to try. The cowboy life doesn't lend itself well to settling down." "Yet here you are, settling in Oklahoma City," Kate observed. "Here I am," Wyatt agreed, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that made her look away quickly. They had reached the boarding house, its wooden porch swept clean for Sunday. Mrs. Hayes could be seen through the front window, preparing the midday meal for her boarders. "Thank you for walking with me," Kate said formally, suddenly conscious of potential observers. Wyatt tipped his hat. "My pleasure, Miss Davis. I'll call for you at 6 on Saturday for the social, if that suits you." Kate nodded, already wondering what she would wear and whether she was making a terrible mistake. "Good day, Mr. Keller." "Katherine," he said softly as she turned to go, "you have a beautiful smile. I hope someday you'll feel comfortable showing it more often." Before she could respond, he was walking away, leaving Kate on the porch with her heart beating a little faster than proper for a Sunday afternoon. The week passed in a blur of work and increasingly nervous anticipation. Kate found herself counting the days until Saturday with a mixture of dread and excitement she hadn't experienced since girlhood. The town social would be her first public outing as something other than a grieving widow, and despite her protestations to Wyatt, she couldn't deny a small part of her was looking forward to it. On Thursday, Mrs. Hayes surprised her by offering the loan of a dress. "My daughter left some things behind when she married and moved to Kansas City," the landlady explained, showing Kate a simple but pretty blue cotton dress with white trim. "This should fit you well enough with minor alterations. More suitable for a social than what you have, I imagine." Kate ran her fingers over the soft fabric, touched by the unexpected kindness. "This is very generous, Mrs. Hayes. Are you certain your daughter wouldn't mind?" The older woman waved away the concern. "Elizabeth has a husband who buys her fine things now. She'd be pleased to know her old dress was being put to good use." Her expression softened slightly. "It's good to see you taking an interest in life again, Miss Davis. Mr. Keller seems a respectable sort." "We're just friends," Kate insisted quickly. Mrs. Hayes gave her a knowing look. "Of course, but friendship is where all good things begin, isn't it?" The night of the social arrived with Kate in a state of near panic. She'd spent hours pressing the borrowed dress, arranging her hair in a more flattering style than her usual severe bun, even dabbing a tiny bit of rose water at her throat and wrists. The woman who looked back at her from the mirror was almost a stranger, younger, fresher, with a touch of color in her cheeks that had nothing to do with pinching them. At precisely 6 o'clock, Mrs. Hayes called up the stairs. "Miss Davis, Mr. Keller is here for you." Taking a deep breath, Kate descended the stairs, conscious of Wyatt's eyes following her progress. He stood in the foyer dressed in his Sunday best, a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders surprisingly well, his unruly brown hair neatly combed, his boots polished to a shine. "You look beautiful," he said simply when she reached him. "Thank you," Kate replied, feeling unaccountably shy. "You're very handsome yourself." Mrs. Hayes watched their exchange with poorly disguised interest. "Have her back by 10, Mr. Keller." "The boarding house doors are locked promptly at that hour." "Yes, madam," Wyatt agreed solemnly. "You have my word." The town hall, normally used for municipal meetings and court proceedings, had been transformed for the social. Paper lanterns hung from the rafters, casting a warm glow over the proceedings. A small group of musicians, a fiddler, a banjo player, and an accordion player, provided lively tunes in one corner, while tables laden with food and drink lined the opposite wall. Kate hesitated at the entrance, suddenly overwhelmed by the noise and crowd after months of quiet seclusion. Wyatt seemed to sense her discomfort and offered his arm. "We'll just stay a little while," he promised. "Long enough to make a respectable showing and contribute to the school fund." His understanding calmed her nerves. "Thank you," she said, taking his arm gratefully. Their entrance did not go unnoticed. Conversations paused momentarily as heads turned to observe the widow Davis arriving with the new cowboy from Mason's livery. Kate felt the weight of curious stares, but was surprised to find many of the looks were approving rather than censorious. Mrs. Peterson bustled over immediately. "Miss Davis, Mr. Keller, how wonderful that you could come. You must try the punch, my own recipe, and the ladies' auxiliary has outdone themselves with the refreshments." The next hour passed more pleasantly than Kate could have imagined. Wyatt stayed attentively by her side, introducing her to people he'd met through his work and engaging easily with her few acquaintances. He was neither possessive nor overbearing, giving her space when she needed it, but remaining close enough to provide silent support. When the musicians struck up a Virginia reel, Wyatt turned to her with a questioning look. "Would you care to dance, Katherine? Only if you feel comfortable, of course." Kate hesitated, torn between propriety and desire. A widow dancing so soon after her husband's death would certainly raise eyebrows, yet the music called to something in her that had been dormant for too long. "Yes," she decided impulsively. "I would like to dance." Wyatt's smile was reward enough for her courage. He led her onto the floor where other couples were forming lines, his hand warm and steady at the small of her back. The dance was simple enough that Kate's rusty skills were adequate, and Wyatt proved to be a capable partner. As they moved through the figures of the reel, Kate found herself smiling, then laughing as Wyatt executed an exaggerated bow during one turn. "See," he said as they came together briefly in the pattern of the dance. "You do remember how to smile." The evening continued with more dancing, conversation, and sampling of the abundant refreshments. Kate gradually relaxed, allowing herself to enjoy the simple pleasures of music and company. When Wyatt suggested they step outside for some fresh air, she agreed readily. The night was clear and cooler than the crowded hall, stars scattered like diamonds across the vast Oklahoma sky. They walked a little way from the building, the sounds of the social muted to a pleasant background hum. "Thank you for bringing me tonight," Kate said, breaking the comfortable silence between them. "I didn't realize how much I needed this." Wyatt nodded, his profile strong in the moonlight. "Sometimes we don't know what we need until someone offers it to us." There was something in his voice, a deeper meaning behind the simple words that made Kate's heart beat faster. She turned to look at him fully and found him already watching her, his expression open and unguarded. "Katherine," he began, then stopped, seeming to search for the right words. "I know we haven't known each other long, and I understand your heart is still healing. But I want you to know that there you two are." Mrs. Peterson's voice cut through the moment like a knife. "They're about to announce the total funds raised. You simply must come inside." The interruption broke the spell between them. Kate stepped back, suddenly aware of how close they had been standing. Wyatt looked momentarily frustrated but recovered quickly, offering a polite smile to Mrs. Peterson. "We'll be right there," he assured her. As the woman bustled back toward the hall, Wyatt turned back to Kate with a rueful expression. "Perhaps another time," he said quietly. Kate nodded, equal parts relieved and disappointed. Whatever Wyatt had been about to say would have changed things between them, and she wasn't entirely sure she was ready for that change. They returned to the social for the announcement that the evening had raised over $300 for the new school, a substantial sum for the small community. By the time the applause died down, it was nearly 10 o'clock. "I should get you back to the boarding house," Wyatt said, checking his pocket watch. "I wouldn't want to break my promise to Mrs. Hayes." The walk back was quieter, both of them lost in their own thoughts. When they reached the boarding house porch, Kate turned to face him. "I had a lovely evening, Wyatt, truly." His smile was gentle. "So did I. Perhaps we could do it again sometime, maybe a Sunday picnic after church next week." The invitation was innocent enough, yet Kate knew accepting would signal her willingness to move beyond mere friendship. The thought both thrilled and terrified her. "I'd like that," she found herself saying, the words surprising her even as they left her mouth. Something like joy flickered across Wyatt's features. "Then it's settled. I'll bring the food if you'll bring yourself." "Good night, Wyatt," Kate said softly, turning toward the door. "Katherine," he called as her hand touched the knob. When she looked back, his expression was serious. "Thank you for trusting me enough to come tonight. I know it wasn't easy." The simple acknowledgement of her struggle touched her deeply. "Some things worth doing never are," she replied, then slipped inside before she could say more. That night, lying in her narrow bed, Kate thought about the evening, the music, the dancing, the moment under the stars when Wyatt had looked at her with such intensity. For the first time since Thomas's death, she allowed herself to consider the possibility of a future different from the one she had planned. Not a replacement for what she had lost, but something new, something yet to be discovered. The thought no longer felt like betrayal. Summer yielded gradually to autumn, the scorching heat of July and August giving way to the milder days of September and October. Kate's friendship with Wyatt deepened with each passing week. Sunday picnics became a regular occurrence, along with occasional walks after church and shared suppers at the boarding house when Mrs. Hayes could be persuaded to set an extra place. Kate found herself laughing more, the weight of grief lightening incrementally with each day. She still thought of Thomas, still missed him, but the sharp pain had dulled to a more manageable ache. In its place grew something unexpected, a warmth that blossomed whenever Wyatt appeared, a flutter of anticipation at the sound of his voice. One crisp October afternoon, they sat beneath a cottonwood tree on the banks of the North Canadian River, the remains of their picnic packed away, enjoying the russet and gold splendor of the autumn landscape. "I've been offered a position," Wyatt said suddenly, breaking the comfortable silence between them. Kate turned to him with interest. "At another livery," he shook his head. "No. Mr. Donovan, the rancher who owns that big spread 10 miles west of town, wants me to manage his horse breeding operation. He's getting older, says he needs someone with experience to take over the day-to-day running of things." "Wyatt, that's wonderful," Kate exclaimed, genuinely pleased for him. "It sounds like a perfect opportunity. It comes with a house," he continued, watching her closely. "Nothing fancy, just a small foreman's cottage on the property, but it's solid and clean." Kate nodded, trying to ignore the sinking feeling in her stomach. "When would you start?" "Next month," Wyatt replied. "But Katherine, there's something else I need to say." There was an intensity in his voice that made her breath catch. Over the past months, they had carefully avoided defining their relationship, allowing it to evolve naturally without forcing declarations or commitments. Now, something in Wyatt's expression told her that was about to change. "I'm listening," she said softly. Wyatt took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle against her skin. "I made you a promise on your birthday that you wouldn't face your next one alone. I intend to keep that promise, but I'm hoping for much more than that." Kate's heart hammered against her ribs as Wyatt continued. "I've come to care for you deeply, Katherine. More than I thought possible after spending so many years keeping to myself. I know you're still healing, and I would never ask you to forget the love you had with your husband. But I believe there's room in a heart for more than one love in a lifetime." He paused, his blue eyes searching hers. "I'm asking if you might consider a future with me. Not right away, I know it's too soon for that. But someday when you're ready, I want to build a life with you." Kate sat motionless, overwhelmed by his words. The directness of his proposal, for that was what it was, even without mentioning marriage, explicitly left no room for misunderstanding. "Wyatt, she began, then faltered, unsure how to express the tumult of emotions his words had stirred within her. "You don't need to answer now," he assured her quickly. "I just wanted you to know where I stand before I take the position at Donovan's. It's 10 miles from town, and I won't be able to see you as often. I didn't want you to think I was pulling away." Relief flooded through Kate at the reprieve. "Thank you for understanding. I care for you too, Wyatt, more than I expected to care for anyone again, but this is all happening so fast." "We have time," Wyatt said simply, squeezing her hand gently before releasing it. "I'm not going anywhere, Katherine, not really. 10 miles isn't so far." As they packed up their picnic and headed back to town, Kate found herself contemplating a future she hadn't allowed herself to imagine. A life with Wyatt would be different from what she'd planned with Thomas, but perhaps no less meaningful. The thought was simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. The following weeks brought changes for both of them. Wyatt moved to Donovan's ranch, his new responsibilities keeping him busy from dawn until dusk. Kate continued her work at the boarding house, but with a restlessness that hadn't been there before. Their Sunday meetings remained the highlight of her week, though now Wyatt rode into town specifically to see her, returning to the ranch before nightfall. As November arrived with its shorter days and colder nights, Kate found herself thinking increasingly about Wyatt's offer. She had grown accustomed to his presence in her life, to sharing thoughts and dreams that had previously remained unspoken. The prospect of a deeper relationship no longer seemed like a betrayal of Thomas's memory, but rather a continuation of life different, but no less valid. One Sunday, after church, Kate made a decision. "I'd like to see where you live," she said as they walked together, her arm tucked through his against the chill wind. "The ranch, I mean, if that would be proper." Wyatt looked surprised but pleased. "I could bring a wagon next Sunday. We could have lunch at the ranch and I could show you around." "Mrs. Donovan would be there as chaperone. She's taken quite an interest in my lady friend from town, as she calls you." The idea of being referred to as Wyatt's lady friend sent a pleasant warmth through Kate despite the November cold. That would be lovely. The following Sunday dawned clear and cold, the first real hint of winter in the air. Kate dressed carefully in her warmest dress and shawl, adding a bonnet Mrs. Hayes had kindly lent her for the occasion. "You look very nice, Miss Davis," the landlady observed as Kate came downstairs. "Is Mr. Keller taking you somewhere special today to see the Donovan ranch?" Kate replied, adjusting her shawl nervously. "He's been working there for almost a month now and I've yet to see it." Mrs. Hayes nodded approvingly. "The Donovans are good people, solid citizens. Mr. Hayes did business with them before he passed." The sound of wagon wheels outside announced Wyatt's arrival. He helped Kate up onto the seat beside him, tucking a heavy blanket around her legs against the cold. "You look beautiful," he said, his breath visible in the crisp air. "Thank you," Kate replied, suddenly shy. "I'm looking forward to seeing your new home." The journey to the ranch took nearly an hour, the wagon following the well-traveled road west out of Oklahoma City. As they rode, Wyatt pointed out landmarks and shared stories about his first weeks at Donovan's, the challenges of managing the horse breeding program, the characters among the ranch hands, the kindness of the Donovans themselves. "It's good work," he told her. "Satisfying in a way driving cattle never was, building something rather than just moving it from one place to another." Kate listened, seeing the contentment in his face, the pride he took in his new position. This was a man who had found his place in the world after years of wandering. The realization only deepened her growing feelings for him. The Donovan ranch came into view as they crested a small rise, a sprawling complex of buildings centered around a handsome two-story house. Corrals and paddocks stretched out behind the main buildings, several containing fine-looking horses. "That's impressive," Kate said, taking in the scope of the operation. Wyatt nodded. "Donovan's been building it for 30 years. Started with just 10 acres and 3 mares after the war. Now he's got the finest horse breeding operation in the territory." They pulled up in front of the main house, where an older couple waited on the porch. George Donovan was a tall, weathered man with a shock of white hair and keen eyes that missed nothing. His wife, Martha, was a plump, pleasant-looking woman whose smile immediately put Kate at ease. "So this is the young lady we've been hearing so much about," Martha said warmly, coming forward to greet them as Wyatt helped Kate down from the wagon. "Welcome to our home, Miss Davis." "Thank you for having me, Mrs. Donovan," Kate replied politely. "Nonsense. It's our pleasure," Martha insisted, taking Kate's arm. "We've been eager to meet the woman who's put such a spring in our foreman's step. Come inside out of this cold. I've got coffee brewing and fresh apple pie just out of the oven." Over coffee and pie, Kate found herself drawn into easy conversation with the Donovans. They were unpretentious despite their success, asking Kate about her life in Oklahoma City with genuine interest. When Martha discovered that Kate had been trained as a teacher before her marriage, the older woman's eyes lit up. "A teacher? How wonderful! You know, we've been trying to establish a proper school for the children of our workers and the neighboring farms. At present, they either go without education or make the long journey into town." George Donovan nodded agreement. "The territory's growing. Can't build a proper community without education. Been saying for years we need a schoolhouse out this way." Kate felt a stirring of interest. "How many children are there?" "At least 15 within riding distance," Martha replied. "Enough to justify a small school, but we haven't been able to attract a teacher willing to come so far from town." The conversation moved on to other topics, but Kate found her mind returning to the idea of a rural school. Thomas had dreamed of establishing a school in the West. Perhaps this was a way to honor his memory while building something new for herself. After the meal, Wyatt took Kate on a tour of the ranch. The foreman's cottage was indeed small but well built and comfortable, with 2 rooms downstairs and a loft above. It stood a respectable distance from the main house, offering privacy while remaining part of the ranch community. "It needs a woman's touch," Wyatt admitted as he showed her the sparse furnishings. "But it's warm in winter and cool in summer." Kate walked through the rooms, imagining curtains at the windows, a tablecloth on the plain wooden table, perhaps a cushioned rocking chair by the fireplace. Simple touches that would transform the space from a bachelor's quarters to a home. Outside, Wyatt proudly showed her the horse breeding operation, the paddocks where the mares grazed, the larger pastures for the growing colts, and the impressive stables where the valuable stallions were kept. "Donovan specializes in quarter horses," Wyatt explained, leading her to a stall where a magnificent chestnut stallion regarded them with intelligent eyes. "This is King's Ransom, his prize stud, worth more than everything I've ever owned put together." The stallion tossed his head proudly, as if aware of his value. Kate laughed as he stretched his neck toward her, sniffing curiously. "He's beautiful," she said, cautiously reaching out to stroke his velvety muzzle. "Careful, he can be temperamental with strangers," Wyatt warned, but the horse stood quietly under Kate's touch, his ears pricked forward with interest. "Well, I'll be," Wyatt said in surprise. "He's not usually so friendly. You must have a way with horses." "I grew up around them," Kate explained. "My father raised work horses on our farm in Missouri. Nothing as fine as this, but I've always loved them." As the afternoon light began to fade, they reluctantly prepared to return to town. Martha Donovan pressed a basket of food into Kate's hands, just some leftovers and a jar of my peach preserves, while George shook her hand firmly. "You're welcome here anytime, Miss Davis," he said sincerely. "And if you've any interest in that teaching position we mentioned, we'd be more than happy to discuss it further." On the return journey, wrapped in blankets against the increasingly cold air, Kate found herself thinking seriously about the Donovan's suggestion. Teaching again would give her purpose beyond the daily drudgery of housekeeping, and if there were to be a school near the ranch. "You're quiet," Wyatt observed as the lights of Oklahoma City came into view. "Did you not enjoy the visit?" "Quite the opposite," Kate assured him. "I enjoyed it very much. The Donovans are lovely people and the ranch is impressive. I was just thinking about what Mrs. Donovan said about needing a teacher for the children." Wyatt glanced at her with interest. "You're considering it, perhaps," Kate admitted. "I was trained as a teacher before I married Thomas. I only taught for a year before we wed, but I loved it, and it would be a way to honor Thomas's dream of bringing education to the frontier." They had reached the boarding house, but neither made a move to descend from the wagon. "Katherine," Wyatt said carefully, "I don't want to presume, but if you were to take such a position, you would need a place to live. The ranch is too far to travel daily from town." The implication hung between them in the cold night air. Kate took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Are you asking me to marry you, Wyatt Keller?" In the dim light from the boarding house windows, she could see his smile, part amusement, part tenderness. "I suppose I am, though not as eloquently as I'd planned. Yes, Katherine Davis, I am asking you to be my wife, to share my home and my life. Not to replace what you had before, but to build something new together." Kate looked at this man who had come into her life so unexpectedly, who had understood her grief without trying to diminish it, who had offered friendship when she needed it most and waited patiently for her heart to heal enough to consider love again. "Yes," she said simply. "I will marry you, Wyatt." His kiss was gentle, respectful of their public location, but filled with promise. When they separated, his eyes shone with happiness that mirrored her own. "We'll need to speak with Reverend Mills," Kate said practically, though her heart was soaring. "And I should write to my family in Missouri. They should be here for the wedding." Wyatt nodded agreement. "And I'll need to prepare the cottage properly for a wife. Perhaps we could aim for after Christmas. That would give us time to make all necessary arrangements." "After Christmas," Kate confirmed, liking the sound of it. A new year, a new beginning. As she prepared for bed that night, Kate found herself thinking of Thomas. There was a twinge of sadness, but no guilt. She could almost imagine him approving of her choice of finding happiness again with a good man, of pursuing the dream of education they had shared. "I'll always love you," she whispered to his memory. "But I think you would want this for me." The weeks leading up to Christmas passed in a flurry of preparations. Kate gave notice at the boarding house, accepted the teaching position at the soon-to-be-established Donovan Ranch School, and wrote long letters to her family in Missouri announcing her engagement and impending marriage. Mrs. Hayes, though sorry to lose her, was genuinely pleased at Kate's happiness. "You deserve this second chance," the landlady told her warmly. "And Mr. Keller is a fine man. I knew it from the first time I saw him looking at you." Wyatt threw himself into preparing their future home, adding a proper kitchen garden, building additional shelves and cupboards, and even commissioning a new bed from the town's carpenter. He rode into Oklahoma City at every opportunity, sometimes just for an hour to see Kate, before returning to his duties at the ranch. When her birthday cake had appeared in the boarding house yard, Kate could never have imagined how much her life would change in the span of 6 months. From crushing loneliness to the prospect of a new marriage, a new home, and a renewed purpose, the transformation was nothing short of miraculous. The wedding was set for January 15, 1886, a date that would allow Kate's parents and younger sister to travel from Missouri for the ceremony. The Donovans insisted on hosting the celebration at the ranch, with Martha taking charge of the wedding preparations with motherly enthusiasm. "It will be small but proper," she assured Kate during one of her visits to the ranch. "Every bride deserves a special day, even a second-time bride." 2 days before Christmas, Kate was helping Mrs. Hayes prepare the boarding house for the holiday when a telegram arrived. Her hands trembled as she opened it, fearing bad news from home. Instead, she found joyful tidings. Her family had departed earlier than planned and would arrive in Oklahoma City on Christmas Eve. "They're coming early," she told Mrs. Hayes excitedly. "Can they stay here? Just for a few days before we all go out to the ranch." The landlady agreed readily, pleased to have guests for the holiday. Kate immediately sent word to Wyatt, who promised to come into town for Christmas Day to meet his future in-laws. When the train pulled into Oklahoma City on Christmas Eve, Kate waited anxiously on the platform, scanning the faces of disembarking passengers. Finally, she spotted them: her father, still straight back despite his 60 years, her mother, whose face lit up at the sight of her daughter, and Emily, her younger sister, now a poised young woman of 20. "Katherine," her mother cried, rushing forward to embrace her. "Oh, my dear girl." The reunion was joyful and tearful. Kate had not seen her family since Thomas's funeral, and there was much to share beyond what could be conveyed in letters. As they settled into the boarding house, Kate found herself telling them everything: her grief after Thomas's death, her lonely birthday, Wyatt's unexpected kindness, and their growing love. "He sounds like a good man," her father said approvingly. "I look forward to meeting him tomorrow." Christmas Day dawned clear and cold, with a light dusting of snow that transformed Oklahoma City into a winter wonderland. Kate woke early, excitement making sleep impossible. Today, her family would meet Wyatt, the man who had brought light back into her world. He arrived promptly at noon, bearing gifts for everyone: a fine leather wallet for her father, a delicate lace shawl for her mother, a book of poetry for Emily, and for Kate, a small box that he asked her to open later when they were alone. The meeting went better than Kate could have hoped. Wyatt charmed her mother with his courteous manners, impressed her father with his knowledge of horses and ranching, and made Emily laugh with stories of his adventures on the cattle drives. By the end of the meal, Kate could see her family had accepted him completely. Later, as they walked together in the crisp winter air, Wyatt gave Kate his Christmas gift: a delicate gold locket containing a small photograph of the two of them taken at the town social in November. "So you'll always have me close to your heart," he explained as he fastened it around her neck. Kate touched the locket gently. "It's beautiful, Wyatt, thank you." "There's something else," he said, reaching into his coat pocket. From it, he withdrew a small piece of paper. "I had this made for you, a renewal of my original promise." Kate unfolded the paper to find another elegantly written note. "I promise you will never spend another birthday alone. For all the days of our lives, your joy will be my joy, your sorrows my sorrows. With love always, Wyatt." Tears filled Kate's eyes as she read the simple words. "You remembered." "Of course I did," Wyatt said softly. "That promise was the beginning of everything for us." The days leading up to the wedding passed quickly. Kate's family traveled out to the Donovan Ranch to help with final preparations and to get to know the community that would become Kate's new home. Emily took particular interest in the schoolhouse that was being readied for Kate's classes, offering to stay on after the wedding to help her sister establish the curriculum. On January 15, 1886, Katherine Davis became Katherine Keller in a simple ceremony performed by Reverend Mills in the Donovan's parlor. The room was decorated with evergreen boughs and winter berries, a fire crackling cheerfully in the hearth as Kate and Wyatt exchanged their vows before a small gathering of family and friends. Kate wore a gown of ivory satin, not white, in deference to her status as a widow, but beautiful nonetheless. Her mother's veil framed her face, and she carried a bouquet of holly and white roses that Martha Donovan had somehow procured despite the winter season. As Wyatt placed a simple gold band on her finger, Kate felt a sense of rightness, of coming full circle. She had loved deeply and lost terribly, but here she was, beginning again with a man who had seen her at her lowest and still found her worthy of love. "I now pronounce you man and wife," Reverend Mills declared, his voice filled with genuine pleasure. "Mr. Keller, you may kiss your bride." Wyatt's kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of all they would share in the years to come. When they turned to face their guests, Kate saw only joy and approval on the faces of those who had supported them on their journey to this moment. The celebration that followed was festive, despite its small scale. Martha Donovan had prepared a feast that would have done justice to a much larger wedding, and George Donovan broke out bottles of fine whiskey he'd been saving for a special occasion. There was music and dancing, laughter and tears, all the elements that marked the beginning of a new family. As evening approached, Kate and Wyatt slipped away to their cottage, now truly their home. Wyatt carried her across the threshold as tradition demanded, setting her gently on her feet in the main room that had been transformed in her absence. Fresh curtains hung at the windows, a colorful quilt adorned the new bed visible through the bedroom doorway, and a fire burned merrily in the hearth, casting a warm glow over everything. "Welcome home, Mrs. Keller," Wyatt said softly. Kate moved slowly through the rooms, touching the simple, thoughtful additions that made the space feel like a home rather than just a house. In the kitchen, she found her mother's recipes carefully copied into a new book. In the bedroom, family photographs had been arranged on a small table. Everywhere she looked, she saw evidence of Wyatt's care and consideration. "It's perfect," she told him, tears of happiness threatening again. "All of it, perfect." That night, as they lay together in the quiet darkness of their new home, Kate felt a peace she had thought lost forever. The past was not forgotten. Thomas would always have a place in her heart, but the future stretched before her, bright with promise and possibility. "Happy," Wyatt murmured, his arms around her. "Yes," Kate answered truthfully. "More than I thought possible 6 months ago." He pressed a kiss to her forehead. "I intend to keep you that way for all our days." The school opened in February, a simple one-room building with desks for 20 students, though only 15 enrolled initially. Kate threw herself into teaching with renewed passion, discovering that her skills had not diminished during her years away from the classroom. The children, ranging in age from 6 to 14, were eager to learn, many having had little or no formal education previously. Emily stayed through the spring, helping Kate establish the school and becoming a beloved assistant teacher to the younger children. When she reluctantly returned to Missouri in May, she left with a promise to visit again soon and a suspiciously fond farewell to one of the young ranch hands. Kate's days fell into a pleasant rhythm, teaching during the week, maintaining their home and participating in the tight-knit ranch community. Wyatt's work kept him busy, but never too busy to show his love in countless small ways. A wildflower left on her desk at the schoolhouse. A warm bath drawn after a particularly tiring day. An evening ride to watch the sunset from their favorite ridge. When summer arrived, bringing with it the fierce Oklahoma heat, Kate discovered she was expecting their first child. The news filled them both with joy and a touch of apprehension. "Are you happy about this?" Kate asked Wyatt as they sat on their porch one evening, watching fireflies dance in the gathering darkness. "Truly happy," Wyatt took her hand, his expression serious. "More than I can possibly express, though I do worry about you. Childbirth is no small thing, especially out here. Martha has already promised to send for the doctor from town when my time comes," Kate assured him. "And my mother will come stay with us. We'll be fine, all 3 of us." As her body changed to accommodate their growing child, Kate found herself reflecting on how much her life had transformed in the space of a single year. From the depths of grief to the heights of joy, from loneliness to belonging, all because a kind-hearted cowboy had refused to let her spend her birthday alone. On July 14, 1887, exactly 1 year and 1 day after she had met Wyatt, Kate gave birth to a son. They named him Thomas William Keller. Thomas to honor the past, William for his father, Keller for their shared future. "He's perfect," Wyatt whispered as he held his son for the first time, wonder and love transforming his features. "Look what we made, Katherine." Kate watched them together, her heart so full it seemed impossible to contain such happiness. "He has your eyes," she observed, noting the clear blue that would likely darken with time. "And your determination," Wyatt chuckled as the infant gripped his finger with surprising strength. "He'll be a handful, this one." Their family and friends celebrated the birth with gifts and visits. The Donovans claimed honorary grandparent status immediately, Martha appearing daily with some new handmade item for the baby. Kate's parents made the journey from Missouri as soon as they received the telegram announcing their grandson's arrival, staying for a month to help the new parents adjust. Life with a newborn brought challenges, of course. Sleepless nights, the constant demands of feeding and changing, the anxiety that accompanied every small cry or sniffle. But Kate found that motherhood suited her, bringing a fulfillment that complemented rather than replaced her roles as wife and teacher. The school continued to thrive, with Kate returning to teaching when Thomas was 3 months old. Martha Donovan happily served as nursemaid during school hours, declaring it good practice for when her own daughter eventually provided grandchildren. One evening in early October, as autumn painted the prairie in gold and crimson, Kate sat nursing Thomas on the porch while Wyatt worked at the small desk inside, going over the ranch accounts. The peaceful domesticity of the moment struck her suddenly, bringing unexpected tears to her eyes. "What's wrong?" Wyatt asked, appearing in the doorway with concern on his face. Kate smiled through her tears, shaking her head. "Nothing's wrong, that's just it. Everything is so right, so perfect. Sometimes I can hardly believe this is my life now." Wyatt came to sit beside her on the porch swing, his arm going around her shoulders as he gazed down at their son. "I know what you mean. A year and a half ago, I was a drifter with no real home and no real purpose. Now look at us." Thomas finished nursing and Kate adjusted her clothing before settling the baby against her shoulder, patting his back gently. "Do you remember what you told me that day by the river, about purpose finding you again?" Wyatt nodded. "I do." "You were right," Kate said simply, "for both of us." They sat together in companionable silence as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in spectacular shades of orange and purple. Their son slept peacefully between them, a tangible symbol of the love and life they had built together. "I have something for you," Wyatt said suddenly, reaching into his pocket. He withdrew a small package wrapped in brown paper and string. "Happy birthday, Katherine." Kate looked at him in surprise. "My birthday isn't until tomorrow." "I know," he smiled. "But I wanted to give you this tonight, just the three of us." Kate handed Thomas to Wyatt and took the package, unwrapping it curiously. Inside was a small leather-bound journal, its cover soft and supple in her hands. "Open it," Wyatt encouraged. The first page bore an inscription in Wyatt's now familiar handwriting. "For Katherine, to record our family story. May these pages hold as much joy as you have brought into my life." "Oh, Wyatt," Kate breathed, touched by the thoughtfulness of the gift. "It's perfect. I thought you might want to write down our experiences, our memories. For Thomas when he's older, and maybe for other children if we're so blessed." The mention of future children brought a warm glow to Kate's heart. "I love it, and I love you." "I love you too," Wyatt replied, his eyes reflecting the depth of his feelings. "More with each passing day." As the stars began to appear in the darkening sky, Kate reflected on the journey that had brought her to this moment. The path had not been straight or easy. There had been pain and loss, grief and loneliness. But there had also been kindness and courage, friendship that blossomed into love, and second chances that proved life's capacity for renewal. "What are you thinking about?" Wyatt asked, noticing her contemplative expression. Kate smiled, leaning her head against his shoulder as their son slept peacefully in his father's arms. "I was thinking about promises kept," she said softly. "And cake." Wyatt's laughter was warm in the cool evening air. "Best cake I ever bought," he declared. "Though Mrs. Miller deserves most of the credit." "Not for the cake," Kate corrected gently. "For knowing exactly what I needed when I didn't know myself." As darkness settled fully around their little home on the Oklahoma prairie, Kate felt a profound sense of gratitude. For the man beside her, for the child in his arms, for the life they shared. A life that had begun with a simple act of kindness, a birthday cake, and a promise that had changed everything. The following day, her 24th birthday, brought no grand celebrations or elaborate gifts. Just a quiet family breakfast, good wishes from friends and neighbors, and a simple dinner with the Donovans. But as Wyatt had promised exactly 1 year earlier, Kate was not alone. She was surrounded by love, by purpose, by the family she and Wyatt had created together. And when Wyatt produced another cake larger than the first, with 2 candles representing their years together, Kate made a different wish than she had on that fateful evening 12 months before. Not a wish born of loneliness and grief, but one rooted in gratitude and hope for the future they would continue to build together, day by day, promise by promise, love by love.